Thank you for checking out Real Talk Personal Finance. Shit's about to get real. Cash Flow King with you today, and today in episode 16, Annuity Basics. Do I need an annuity? Thank you for checking out Real Talk Personal Finance, and thank you very much to everybody for your patience. I realize that, as I mentioned on the last episode, in episode 15, I had a lot of things going on, and I probably put out one episode in the span of about 5 weeks total. Not that I owe anybody anything, but I'd like to put out shows a little bit more consistently than that. And the good news is I'm back. So I do have a mini series planned. We're going to kick it off today with Annuity Basics, but the next several shows will be on annuities. And so some people, this is going to be directly speaking to you. This might resonate with something that you're grappling with right now or will be in the future, in the near future. Other people, it may not necessarily be something that you're interested in or need to know about today for yourself. However, you may have friends, family members, coworkers, parents, grandparents, and so on that could benefit from some of this information, because annuities are one of the most widely misunderstood financial products out there, in my opinion. We're going to take some time to go through it all. Rather than do an episode of several hours all at once, we're going to break it up. So today is on the basics. Before we get into today's show, just real quick, would like to do a couple of shout outs. First we have, looks like 3 new countries that are listening to the show. And as I mentioned, I've not put one out in basically 3 weeks. And then before that, it had been roughly about 2 weeks. So thank you for continuing to get the show out, but we'd like to welcome our listeners, our new listeners in Dominican Republic, South Africa, and United Kingdom. So thanks very much for tuning into the show. Hopefully you enjoy it, and we appreciate all of our listeners, so thank you. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Today we're going to cover the basics and talk through several different points, and then towards the end, I will let you know the next few shows that are going to be coming up. So the first part of today's show is, do I need an annuity? And you likely already have at least one, and you may not even realize it. There's a lot of people in the financial media out there. I don't like to name names, but there's some very large names that we won't mention, but you probably heard them completely bash annuities over an extended period of time. Pretty much their entire financial media presence is no annuities, never annuities, annuities are bad, blah, blah, blah. And they can be. But they can also be excellent solutions for the right people in the right situations. Kind of like the Life Insurance Basics episode that I did. There's going to be certain situations where there's something that's going to work for the masses, and then other situations where certain products will work well in very individualized situations. Annuities are something where I think, as we'll talk about as we go through today's show, and then individually when we talk about the different types of annuities out there that are going to fit well for some and not at all for others. So before you just kind of throw it all away saying all are good or all are bad, I think it's important to have a fundamental understanding of what exactly we're talking about. And I can tell you, there was a time where I worked for a financial services firm that maybe had 2 or 3 advisors in the office that were well versed in and utilizing annuities with their clients, and the rest of them pretty much wrote them off completely. And come to find out later on, as I gained more experience and learned more over the course of my career, realized that they just, quite frankly, even the financial advisors oftentimes don't understand them. Now, that's not to say that financial advisors that tell everybody that they need one, that's the right answer either, because generally it's not. So you need to make decisions for yourself, and part of being able to make an informed decision for yourself is getting educated on different types of products, including annuities, which is the goal of today's show and the next several shows that we're going to do for you as part of this mini-series. So as I mentioned, you likely already have at least one annuity, and you may not even realize it. What am I talking about when I say that? Well, we can take a look at Social Security retirement benefits. Now, the vast majority of people will be eligible. We're not going to go through the nuts and bolts of that today. I did get a little bit of feedback from some listeners that they would like to hear maybe an episode in the future on Social Security retirement benefits. And there's a lot of moving parts there. It's probably going to be a longer episode if we do one. So I'm still contemplating whether or not I want to do that, but it's possible we could see one of those shows pop up in the future. So we're not going to get into that today. However, for those that are, and the vast majority of individuals are eligible for Social Security retirement benefits, you essentially have an annuity or will have an annuity, presumably in your retirement years, which is basically going to be a stream of income payments for as long as you live and potentially could cover even more than one lifetime. We'll save all the details for that episode if we were to do that episode. But for anybody that's eligible for Social Security retirement benefits, that's essentially an annuity. And so people that bash annuities, just tell them, okay, well, why don't you go ahead and give me your Social Security check? And they're going to say, what the hell are you talking about? And even though it's not a retail annuity per se, it is technically still a form of an annuity. In terms of a stream of payments generally for lifetime, sometimes, oftentimes more than one lifetime, which we'll get into. The second type that you may have, and these are becoming less and less common, so you may not, but there are some folks, especially if you're quite a bit older and you've worked for an employer for an extended period of time, since way back when, for decades, it's quite possible you may have access to a defined benefit pension plan, where generally the way that those would work is that you go to work for an organization, you're there for a period of time, and based on your years of service and your salary or compensation over the course of time, there's typically a formula that they will use to calculate how much your pension benefit would be. And so typically when you retire from that employer, you'll have a host of different options in terms of how you would like to elect to receive that pension benefit, and most often that's done on a monthly basis. So somebody's going to get a check on a monthly basis, and there's different options. We won't get into all that today about if it's for their lifetime or them and a spouse or them in a period of a certain number of years. There's different ways to set them up, and every plan is going to be a little bit different. But essentially, that defined benefit pension plan where you're getting a check essentially for the rest of your life oftentimes is also essentially a form of an annuity. So I think most people, if you told them, hey, I have a pension, and or hey, I am going to be eligible for Social Security retirement benefits at some point in time, would not think that that's a bad thing. And so effectively, in essence, what they're doing is acknowledging and essentially endorsing the fact that annuities aren't all that bad. Who would want to turn down a stream of payments for their lifetime and have some sort of guaranteed income, right? So you might be scratching your head like, what the hell? I thought this was about annuities. Why are we talking about Social Security and pensions? What the hell is an annuity anyway, right? Well, there's different definitions out there. One of the more common ones is basically that an annuity is an insurance contract that is issued and distributed by certain financial institutions with the intention of paying out invested funds in an income stream, typically a fixed income stream, in the future. So people use annuities for different reasons, and we're going to get into some of that today, and we'll talk more specifically about different types as we get into those individual shows on different specific types of annuities. But that's just a quick definition for all the listeners there. So this sounds great. What's the catch, right? Well, there are many considerations, and it may or may not be appropriate. Annuities may or may not be appropriate for different investors depending on a whole host of factors, including things like your age, your financial situation, your financial goals. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, annuities are one of the most widely misunderstood financial products out there. So let's talk a little bit more about annuities in general terms before we get into breaking them down. And so the natural next question might be, well, why do most people use annuities? Like, what's the big deal? I would say, from my personal and professional experience, that there's a few different reasons. The vast majority of people that choose to utilize an annuity are doing so for some sort of, oftentimes it's going to be a lifetime in most cases, income streams. So when we get into retirement income planning, and we may do an episode way at the end to kind of bring everything full circle just on retirement income planning. I'm trying to give you the pieces and components right now just to kind of give you a basic understanding of how different things work. But then it's like a puzzle. You kind of have to put it together. Typically you want to do that with a professional, but you kind of have to put that together and piece that together into your own financial situation to get the full picture. But when we talk about retirement income planning, and there's different components of retirement income planning, one thing that often we're looking at are different sorts of and types of income streams that are going to be there to fund certain types of expenses, presumably in retirement. And so a lot of people will choose to utilize an annuity for a portion of their portfolio to essentially create a lifetime income stream. And a lot of people, as I mentioned, these days may not have access to a defined benefit pension plan, right? Way back, and there's folks out there that are currently right now even receiving pension benefits every month and Social Security retirement benefits every month. Well, what happens if you don't have a pension at work? Maybe you just have a 401k or some other type of plan, and maybe you also have Social Security retirement benefits, but now you essentially went from what most people were used to, which is 2 guaranteed income streams, down to 1. For some people, that works out just fine. We'll do some different shows on different strategies and philosophies in terms of how all this stuff works. But let's just say, what if that individual wanted a secondary or even a tertiary income stream? What's one way to do that? And the answer for some people is going to be some form of an annuity to create their own pension-like income. And along the same lines, by having a lifetime income stream or an income stream from an annuity, what this helps do a lot of things really, but one of the big ones is to mitigate or even in some cases eliminate what we like to call in the industry longevity risk. And so there's different retirement risks that exist out there. I'm not going to go through all of those, but the one that we like to call sort of the magnifier that applies to all of them is longevity. So each and every risk that might exist out there, the longer we're alive, the longer that risk is in place. And so longevity risk essentially magnifies and extends the length of time for all the other risks to come into play. And by utilizing an annuity and having an income stream from an annuity that generally, not always, but generally can pay out for as long as you live, whether that's 2 days, 20 years, or 200 years, which obviously that's pretty unrealistic, but the income stream from the annuity will continue to pay out. So you don't really have to worry necessarily about running out of money. And we'll talk more about that as time goes on. So the first big one, why do people use annuities? Number one, lifetime income streams or income streams for a period of time. Doesn't necessarily have to be lifetime, but oftentimes it is. Number two, to a somewhat lesser extent, I would say there's some people, especially if we're looking at outside of retirement plans. So if somebody is looking to invest money or place money outside of a retirement plan and they are in a high income tax bracket and they're particularly interested in certain tax deferral benefits. Number two would be tax deferral benefits. There are certain types of annuities that can be used where any gains that may happen inside of that contract are not taxed unless and until a withdrawal is made from that annuity contract. And there's a whole host of other considerations or rules that go into that. So don't just automatically think, oh, well, I like tax deferral and I have some money to invest outside of a retirement plan, so maybe I should put it in a non-retirement type of annuity. No, that's not what we're saying. And by the way, I probably should have started with this, but we don't give any advice on the show. So please understand that there is no tax, legal, financial, or any other advice being given. This is strictly for informational and educational purposes only. Always consult with your own professional and make your own decisions. So I just want to make that clear. And I pretty much say that on every episode, but especially when we're talking about different types of financial products, especially those like annuities that have some longer term consequences, you want to be particularly careful that you are looking at all the angles. So it's quite possible that the list that we're going through here or getting ready to go through under considerations is not necessarily going to be exhaustive, but it should be fairly comprehensive. So we're going to try to touch on the main points. There may be something that I miss. So don't take this as the end all be all. It's just, again, to provide some education and entertainment and to encourage you to continue to do your own due diligence and research on your own. And then hopefully to consult with a professional on your own that can help you see all this stuff through. Let's see here. Tax deferral benefits. So like I said, there can be some tax deferral benefits specifically for non-retirement funds. And so we might talk about that a little bit later when we get into some of the other episodes. The third would be, believe it or not, to accomplish a particular investment goal. So while annuities are most often used for income streams, generally lifetime income streams, there are certain use cases where somebody may not actually be interested in a lifetime income stream, or maybe they already have sufficient sources of income streams outside of an annuity, but they have a very specific or particular investment or financial goal that an annuity may help them accomplish. And we'll go through, I guess, just a couple of quick tidbits, and we'll get into the specifics on these other episodes. I know I keep saying that. I just don't want to go too far down any given rabbit hole in this sort of overview or this basic show. This is just to kind of get you thinking and scratching your head a little bit and hopefully interest you in learning more about more specific types of these products. But there's some general bullet points and things to keep in mind regardless of the type of annuity that we're talking about. One example of a particular type of annuity where somebody might be interested in utilizing it not for lifetime income but for another goal, and believe it or not, a lot of people don't even know this is possible, is let's say you have a client who wants to simply earn a higher fixed interest rate than they could get at, say, their local bank or credit union in terms of a bank CD. There are types of annuities out there that oftentimes can provide a higher fixed interest rate along with some other benefits like tax deferral. We'll get into that a little bit on the next episode, but that would be an example of one reason. Another one, especially in light of all the market volatility that's going on, you may have a client that is interested in principal protection. So they want to protect their capital, but they also want the potential for growth, right? They may be okay with not receiving a stated or fixed rate, but subject to a little bit of variability in how much they could earn, knowing that they can't lose money in a particular type of contract. There are contracts like that exist out there. That's a different type of annuity. We'll talk about that in the next couple shows. And then finally, just the ability to invest for higher potential gains, both, on the upside and on the downside, but also with having some protections in place. It can be very similar to investing the way that most people are used to, say in the stock market, for example, but having certain guardrails in place or certain protections in place where if the market moves against you or things don't go as initially planned, there are some additional benefits that are inside of other types of contracts that you might take a look at. And of course, there's going to be corresponding costs and fees associated with that. We'll get into all that stuff a little bit on some of the upcoming episodes. But those are 3 examples of, hey, I want to accomplish a particular investment goal, but I may not necessarily want to generate a lifetime income stream. Are there other uses for different types of annuities? The answer would be yes, and those are 3 different examples of 3 different types of annuities that could be used. You'll notice that I didn't name them because I don't want to go down the rabbit hole just yet. We will do that individually on the upcoming episodes, but I just kind of want to give you a flavor or an idea of what's possible in this episode. So I think the first thing that anybody needs to ask is, what are you trying to accomplish? What are your financial goals? That's where you have to start. What are you trying to do? And then once you understand and realize and know what it is that you're trying to do, the next natural question would be, does an annuity fit in to what I'm trying to do? And if so, how? And that's where it all goes back to making sure that you're making decisions in the context of your overall financial plan. So you could learn the bits and pieces about different types of annuities and different types of contracts. And, that sounds good. And you make a decision to do something in isolation, but I would say that that's the wrong approach. You need to do that from the standpoint of and in the context of your overall financial plan and your overall financial goals. Does that particular product or product type accomplish what you're trying to accomplish in light of your overall financial plan? And if you don't know the answers to those questions right now, that's okay. Take some time to think about it. And, you can certainly, there's no rush for any of this. In fact, you should never, in my opinion, make any financial decision that is rushed, because generally you're going to look back and you're going to regret it. So always take your time with these. Actually, I wasn't planning on talking about this, but depending on the state that you live in and the type of contract that you decide you're interested in, if you did decide to purchase an annuity, there are certain look back or free look provisions where you have so many days to what they call free look the contract, where if you did sort of have a change of heart or change your mind, you could go back essentially and get out of it. But those timeframes are extremely limited in terms of the amount of time that you have. So again, I wouldn't rely on that. Know that it's kind of nice to know that those are there, and depending on, again, your state, assuming you're in the U.S., I know we have some international listeners. Unfortunately, I'm not well-versed enough to know how this might work internationally, but for those that are in the U.S., you want to make sure you check with the Department of Insurance in your state, and depending on the type of product that you're looking at, and certainly ask the agent or advisor that you're utilizing for that if you decide to do anything like that, to talk to you about the free look provisions. But again, you want to take your time. You don't want to rush, right? But even after taking your time, just know that in most cases, you have so many days to essentially change your mind, right? But you want to know that beforehand. You don't want to sign something and then say, hey, how many days do I have again? Like that's not the approach that you want to take. Let's talk about some general considerations in terms of annuities. And again, this is just a broad blanket part of the episode where we're going to talk about some overlapping things that you're going to want to be thinking about. As we get into the individual episodes, we'll dive a little bit deeper, more specifically on how these might apply with certain types of contracts. But one of them is liquidity provisions. So there's something called a surrender charge period. Some people might call it a commitment period, and that will vary pretty widely, right? It could be on the lower side or the shorter side, anywhere from 3 to 4 years. On the longer side, there's some contracts out there that are 15 to 20 years. 7 is fairly common. So a 7-year surrender charge schedule or 7-year commitment period is fairly common. Your time horizon for the fund should generally be long, and in some cases, if you're doing it for income purposes, a lifetime. So annuities are typically not short-term investments, and there's always going to be an exception. I alluded to an example of somebody that wanted to earn a higher fixed rate of return. They might find a particular type of annuity where they don't care about the income stream, they want a higher fixed rate of return, they want to defer the taxes while the assets are in that contract, and then maybe they want to do something else with the funds later, and it's a fairly short to mid sort of time frame. That's a little bit different, but if you're not talking about that and you're talking about the vast majority of other types of use cases for these, you typically are not looking at something where it's going to be a short-term commitment. So annuities are generally long-term investments. Correspondingly, those surrender charge schedules are oftentimes a little bit longer, some longer than others, depending on the product, and there's different features of different contracts. Some companies will offer different quote-unquote bonuses, and it looks really nice until you realize that, oh my gosh, this is a 15 or 20-year surrender charge product, which again may or may not be appropriate for the individual. So you want to make sure that you're doing your due diligence on any contract that you might consider. But the surrender charge period is something that you're going to want to know what that is. And essentially that's a period of time, again, not for all. There's some annuities where pretty much you make a one-time irrevocable decision and that's it. There's no going back. But there are other types where you have a surrender charge period that basically says, let's say, for example, 7 years, where within the first 7 years, you have limited access or limited liquidity of the money that's in the contract. And if you were to change your mind, say in year 3 or 4, for example, in a 7-year contract, and you wanted to get out, there's typically going to be a fairly high penalty or surrender charge fee that's assessed and associated for you to get out. And depending on how much money you put into a contract, that oftentimes could be several $1,000s, even in some cases tens of thousands of dollars. So again, you want to take your time and you want to make sure you fully understand what you're looking at, what you're getting into before you do it, if you do it. There's something else sort of related to this called free out provisions. So oftentimes there's a 10% free out provision during the surrender charge period. So let's say somebody went into a 7-year contract, and within the first 7 years, every company is going to be a little bit different. But if they needed access to a portion of their money, they might be able to withdraw, say, 10%, for example, without any sort of penalties. Some companies it's 5%, some companies it's 10%, some could be a little more or a little less. You got to check the specific contract that you're looking at. But a lot of times there will be some limited liquidity. But if you had a complete change of heart, somebody sold you something and you're like, man, I really didn't do my homework on this and I don't want this anymore, and you're in a 7-year contract and it's year 2, 3, 4, 5, you're going to pay a pretty hefty penalty to get out. So again, you want to make sure that you're really taking a hard look at what it is that you're considering putting your money into before you do it. It's not like other types of investments where they're quite a bit more liquid and you can simply click a button or place a quick trade and you can be out with typically zero, if anything, sometimes just a very small fee. These annuities generally have very high surrender charges. Now, as long as you stick to the program, so to speak, and you go in with your eyes wide open and you understand what you're getting into and you have no problem with the liquidity provisions in the surrender charge period, well then those fees and penalties would not be assessed if the money stays in the contract according to what you agreed to. So again, all the more reason you want to make sure you're going to be able to be in there for at least that period of time, if not for longer. The fees that you'll pay, there's a lot of different thoughts on this. There's some annuities, believe it or not, that there's quote unquote no fees. And there's other ones that have very significant fees. Some would even say borderline egregious fees. And that's going to depend on the type of contract that you have, the type of annuity that you have. And even if it's one classification, so there's 3 main categories. We'll talk about those at the end. But even if you're in one particular category, you could have a half a dozen companies that all issue annuity contracts in that category, and they could have widely different and varying fees. So it's not really something we're going to be able to get into here on a basics podcast, but just know that you want to be asking questions, right? You want to know what the fees are, if any, on a particular contract. And that's obviously going to be a very important decision. There's a lot of additional benefits that come with annuities, and if you need them, they can be well worth the money. But if you don't need them, there's really no point in paying for them. It's something that I talk about with clients all the time. And, a lot of times clients will say, well, hey, is this worth it? And the answer is, well, if the benefits that the contract provides is something that we need in the context of your plan, then absolutely. But if not, and there are other ways to do this, and if you're okay with the inherent risks that come along with doing it in another way, then maybe not. We don't have to pay the fee, or maybe we don't want to be looking at this particular contract for that individual. So again, it's going to vary, but you want to be aware of what the fees are on the contracts that you're looking at. Another big one is tax implications. So you can purchase annuities in different ways. Some people will oftentimes use retirement plans and retirement funds to purchase annuities. So this could be, for example, somebody has money in a 401k and they want to roll it over into an IRA, an individual retirement account, and they want to purchase an annuity within that IRA, right? So those funds would be tax deferred. That's oftentimes how these are purchased. Not always, but a lot of times that's how they're purchased. So from the context of retirement plans, and again, we don't give tax, legal, or any other advice on the show, but there's really no difference in that particular instance where the money's pre-tax in a 401k. Ultimately, when it's withdrawn, whether it's withdrawn directly from the 401k or first rolled over to an IRA, an individual retirement account, and then it's withdrawn, it's still going to be taxed at ordinary income when it comes out. So whether that person had money, say, invested in mutual funds or ETFs, exchange traded funds, or stocks or bonds or whatever, versus an annuity, from a tax standpoint, when the money comes out of that particular account, it's not going to matter. It's going to be taxed the same on the retirement plan side. So that's something to know. And if it's a Roth account, let's say it's a Roth IRA, for example, or let's say you had a Roth IRA and you built it up nicely over time and you want to take a portion. You don't have to do all. You can take a portion of a Roth IRA if it makes sense in the context of your situation, and complete what's called a Roth IRA to Roth IRA transfer, partial transfer, and take a portion of those funds, that portfolio, and move it into another Roth IRA, and that other Roth IRA purchases the annuity. Well, now, as long as you meet the rules for qualified distributions, and if you don't know what I'm referring to, go back and listen to the episodes on Roth IRA Basics and Roth IRA Intermediate Concepts. We talk all about that. But generally, 5 years and age 59 and a half or older, if both are met, then any and all distributions from that Roth IRA, even if you hold an annuity in that Roth IRA, are going to be completely tax-free, just like they would be for any other investment. So the taxes from a retirement plan standpoint, I guess where I'm going with that is they're going to work very similarly, if not identically, to how they would work if you did own an annuity with those retirement funds, right? That part's pretty much going to be the same. However, it's very different if we're talking about non-retirement funds or non-retirement plans. There are certain annuities you can purchase with non-retirement funds, and depending on the type of annuity and how it's structured, that can be taxed in different ways. So the example that I mentioned, and we'll probably go into a little bit more detail with some numbers on the upcoming episodes, but for now, just the example I mentioned for the person that, let's say, wants a higher fixed interest rate. They're not interested in a lifetime income stream. They just want to use a certain type of annuity for that purpose, right? For that individual, they're going to defer all the taxes on the interest or earnings within the contract while the money's in there. However, when they go to pull the money out, it's considered what we call LIFO, which stands for last in, first out, right? The last money in, so the interest in this case, is the first money that the IRS would consider to come out, and that is going to be taxable at ordinary income. And then anything above and beyond that, once all the growth or earnings or interest is taken out, then and only then do we get into the basis or the principal, which would be considered a return of principal, and that part's not taxable. Again, we'll do an example of that with some details on the next episode. But just to mention that. So that's one scenario for non-retirement funds. If you're not using it for lifetime income purposes and you just have some money in a contract for a while and then you pull some out, you're going to be paying taxes first on those dollars that are coming out until all the growth is extracted. And then it's going to be a return of principal. So it's very favorable while the money's in there. It's growing tax deferred, kind of like a retirement plan. But when the money comes out, you're going to start paying ordinary income on the earnings first, and then you're not going to pay anything on your return of your principal once you get into your basis. So that's probably a little in the weeds. If you didn't quite follow that, either rewind it and hear it again, or don't worry about it, because we'll go through an example with some numbers on the next episode. The other type of non-retirement annuity that you oftentimes will see people with in terms of taxation, if they do end up utilizing that for a lifetime income stream. And we'll talk in the next episode about what's called annuitization. And if they are getting lifetime income, there's something called the exclusion ratio, which will basically show you of every, let's say, monthly payment that an individual is receiving, what portion of that is considered principal and what portion of that is considered earnings. And generally, the exclusion ratios can be pretty favorable. It's definitely more favorable than the first method that I just mentioned. But again, those are two total different use cases for an annuity. And this is where some of the stuff gets confusing, because it's like, all right, well, if I use it because I want to grow some money and then I want to pull it out later, I'm kind of fucked on the taxes, right? But if I use it because I want a lifetime income stream and we use this exclusion ratio thing, then that's kind of badass and I'm not quite fucked as bad, right? And I'm being a little facetious here, but generally, like, if you're looking at it from the different standpoints, one of them is I want to use a contract for a specific and particular investment goal. The other one is I also want to use it for a very specific investment goal, but that investment goal is lifetime income. And when we turn on lifetime income in a certain way through what's called annuitization, which we'll talk about in detail in the next episode, the rules from the standpoint of non-retirement money and how that's taxed as that money comes back to the individual, they change a little bit, right? So again, you want to make sure you have a good team of advisors around you, whether that's a financial advisor and or a tax advisor and or a legal advisor. Ideally, you'd have all of them, but you want to make sure you're looking at all the angles of this stuff. You don't just want to jump into something and then realize later on, like, what the hell just happened from a tax standpoint. So these are all important considerations that you're going to want to be thinking about. And by the way, the insurance company that issues the contract, their software should show you, if you are one of those that's using non-retirement money for lifetime income purposes, they should be able to show you on that hypothetical illustration. It should have the exclusion ratio listed on there, but also definitely something you want to talk to your tax advisor about. So as I mentioned, how does this fit into your overall tax situation, right? There's different types. I think we talked a little bit about this in some of the Roth episodes. I know we did a Roth IRA basics and a Roth IRA intermediate concepts, and we talked a little bit about how certain types of withdrawals from certain types of retirement plans can potentially have an impact on other things. For example, taxation of your Social Security retirement benefits, right? So that's a consideration. And so if you have annuity income, depending on where it's coming from and what the taxation on that is looking like, it could potentially affect things like the taxation on your Social Security retirement benefits. And so could withdrawals from pretty much any other type of pre-tax retirement account. If you remember back to those episodes, there's different strategies and different ways to think about it, but we made an argument essentially for if we're going to utilize Roth accounts and we take these qualified distributions, which typically means the account's open for at least 5 tax years and we're at least age 59 and a half or older, then we're getting these distributions out tax-free. Well, those are not counted in what's called the provisional income formula. Those do not have an impact on the taxation of your Social Security retirement benefits. But other types of income, like a withdrawal from a pre-tax 401k or a traditional IRA, typically will or could affect it. Same thing with annuities, right? So whether you had an IRA, let's say you had a 401k that's pre-tax, you roll it over into an IRA, also pre-tax, and that IRA owns mutual funds and you take money out, it could affect it. Similarly, if you do the exact same thing, but instead of mutual fund, you have an annuity in that IRA and you take money out, same thing. So I don't want you to think that, okay, well, annuities are going to fuck me on my Social Security taxes and like other investments aren't. No, that's not necessarily true, but we need to be thinking about, where is that annuity held? What type of account is it in? It's really more about the account type than it is the product. However, on the retirement side anyway, when we get into non-retirement investments, it gets super complicated in a hurry. So we're probably not going to delve too much into that. The main point here is, from a tax implication standpoint, you really want to have an understanding of how does this fit into your strategy. And the takeaway is, if I'm using non-retirement funds as part of my financial strategy and I'm using annuities, I better know what the hell I'm doing. And if I'm not, and I'm using retirement money as part of my financial strategy for annuities, I still better know what the hell I'm doing. But the rules are pretty much the same as if I had those retirement accounts invested in any other investment that's stock market based, right? So that's kind of the takeaway there. I'm probably making this more complicated than it needs to be. But so hopefully you guys are still with me. If not, again, feel free to rewind that, check it out. And hopefully a lot of this will make more sense as we go through some of the more specific episodes on different types of contracts. I'm just trying to do a blanket kind of a catch-all basic show today and just give you some general things to think about that's going to apply across the board. All right, and then the last thing I'll say on the tax implication thing and just in general is that annuity ownership can take different forms. So typically there's going to be an owner, there's also going to be an annuitant, there hopefully will be beneficiaries. There's a whole host of different items that come into play, right? You can have an annuity that's owned by a person, you can have an annuity that's owned by a trust, there's different ways to own annuity contracts. For the purposes of all these episodes, because again, this show is targeted essentially for like middle America, right? Just average, everyday working people go to work, get a paycheck, trying to put money away for retirement, trying to hopefully retire someday. We might have some FIRE people in here, some financial independence, retire early people in here. We might have some non-FIRE people that are just kind of traditional, hey, I'm going to go to work. It's going to be 30, 40 years before I can get out of this gig, but eventually I want to. Whatever your situation is, that's what this show is designed for. So to keep things simple, because they're probably already getting complicated enough, we are going to assume in this episode and likely all the future subsequent episodes on annuities that we will assume that the client is the owner and the annuitant, that all of that is the same. And that probably doesn't make any sense because we didn't talk about annuitants. Annuitants are typically when we talk about income payments on annuities, that is the individual's life that those payments are based on, right? So one person could technically own an annuity and have somebody else listed as an annuitant and have the payments on that annuity be subject to that other annuitant's expected life expectancy, expected lifetime. We're not going to do that. We're going to assume, hey, I'm a person, I got money that I want to put in an annuity potentially, and I'm going to be the owner. I'm also going to be the annuitant, and it's going to be based on my lifetime. So to keep it simple, that's what we're going to be assuming for these next several shows. So, do I need an annuity, right? That was kind of the opening question of today's episode, and everybody wants the easy answer, right? So here we go. Maybe. Stay tuned and listen to the upcoming series of episodes for more specifics in order to make your own informed decision, right? You should be making your own decision in the context of your overall financial goals and strategy. There are always going to be outliers, and there are always going to be situations where something is going to work for a certain individual, but it may not work for others, right? So you really want to do this based on you. However, if you wanted me to make a general sort of blanket statement on annuities, most of the time, for most people that are considered middle class, whatever that means to you, right? If you're in your 20s, 30s, and 40s, typically you probably do not need an annuity at this time. If you are in your 50s, 60s, 70s, or maybe even a little bit older than that, you very well could potentially need an annuity or want an annuity. And we'll talk through what that looks like in the three major categories or different types of annuities in the upcoming episodes. So we are going to do an episode next probably on fixed annuities. That's the first type. The next one, we're going to do an episode on indexed annuities. That's the second type. And then finally, we'll do another episode on the third one that gets a bad rap, especially from a lot of the financial media people out there, are variable annuities. So that would be number 3. So those are the next 3 shows coming up: fixed annuities, indexed annuities, and variable annuities. Also, I have on my tentative outline here that we are going to have some additional shows after that. Let me see if I can go to it real quick. We are going to do one, as I mentioned before, on the 4% rule. We may do one on Social Security retirement benefits. And then possibly at the end of these episodes, I may throw a couple more mixed in there somewhere. Eventually, we might do one on sort of just retirement income planning in general, just trying to give you a general roadmap or framework or ways to think about things. I think a lot of that is probably going to come through when I do the episode on the 4% rule, depending on how detailed I get. So I may or may not do another one separately on retirement income planning, but that's kind of what I'm thinking about going forward. So today we have our Annuity Basics, Do I Need an Annuity show, which is kind of a catch-all and just a brief introduction to annuities. I know it's a 40-minute brief introduction, but it's still a brief introduction because I could have done this for hours and gone through all the different types and nobody would listen, so we're not going to do it that way. Today's the basics. Next will be fixed, then indexed, then variable, and then we'll see what happens after that. But again, 4% rule and Social Security and retirement income planning. Those are three that I'm kind of kicking around that may or may not surface after that. So we'll kind of see what happens. Also, we will have at some point this summer Travel Queen back on. She is taking a trip here in June. If you guys remember Travel Queen from episode number 8, I believe it was, she's going to Greece. So we're going to get her back on the show. I just got back from a trip not too long ago and found out some other cool stuff about some travel hacking and points and all that good stuff. So we'll probably have another show either separately or potentially with her where we get into some of that stuff. So lots of stuff coming. Again, thank you for your patience. Thank you to all of our listeners for tuning into the show. Sorry that it's been a little while, but hopefully, at least over the next several episodes, we'll be somewhat more consistent. I don't want to promise you a definitive timeline that I'm going to publish shows because these shows I just mentioned still need to be recorded, but I can tell you it's not going to be 5 weeks until the next show. We'll definitely have something for you before that. So again, thank you very much for tuning into episode 16. We will see you in the next episode.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.